Bam, 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 bam. Marines are a part of Halo. They've been in there since the very beginning, and we've done videos in the past where we see how long we can survive against them, how many we can save along the way. But one thing that's always been really interesting is that across the course of the Halo franchise, some Marines have more health and some Marines have less health. And it's interesting to take a closer look at these details because it does play a major role into how firefights and other types of combat in the Halo gameplay itself sometimes can play out, and which Marines make it and survive a little bit longer, and which ones kind of just get lost along the way. So we thought it'd be interesting to compare all of the Marines across every game to see which ones are truly the Alpha Chad Marines and which ones are kind of these weak Kyles over here. But first, before we get into today's video, this video is sponsored by none other than the fantastic people over at Vite Ramen, which has helped us out so many times before. I'm in the process of moving right now, and when you don't have a full functioning kitchen or house, being able to rely on some good tasting healthy ramen, it goes a long way. And Vite Ramen is literally known for having a great reputation in the gaming community. They've done some really awesome things lately. Their ramen is healthy and it tastes great. What more is there to say here? Right now, when you order a bundle, you get $25 of free stuff included in your bundle. And seriously, 2022 is a big year for Vite Ramen. They're becoming really popular and everything's in really high demand, so you might notice in the store some things are between limited quantities and some made to order status. So you definitely want to jump on and get your orders placed as soon as possible so you can be eating this great ramen quickly too. Once again, a huge thank you to the guys at Vite Ramen for supporting our content, sponsoring Rocket Sloth, and of course providing our audience with some cool ramen. Okay, let's go ahead and jump back into this. Okay, now before we jump into this, fortunately enough, General Kid already did a video taking a closer look at the specific stats behind every Marine, which is a huge, awesome resource that we can actually look to figuring out the strengths of some of the Marines. If you're not already subscribed to General Kid, make sure you are and check out his video. But there's a couple of nuanced special Marines that just hit differently than other types of Marines. Sergeant Johnson is one of the most interesting characters to look at, as he's one of the few human characters who gets full-on plot armor in some cases. Like at the beginning of Halo 2, he's straight up invincible. He can not die at all. He can't even temporarily die and come back to life. Though in Halo 3, it is changed where he can die and he can come back to life, and he will shoot you right afterwards. So it is interesting just to see that there's like super plot armor in Halo 2, and in Halo 3 there's lesser plot armor, but he's still not gonna die. Combat Evolved, though, is different when it comes to Johnson because he was just like a regular Marine back then. There wasn't a lot of story behind him. He was just a Marine that had a really good voice actor. And in turn, you could kill him just like any other Marine. So his plot armor was non-existent there, but later on more Marines would pop up with the same voice actor, and that was just the way that it was. But actually, if we look even closer to the numbers, that actually might not be the case. Sergeant Johnson is still in its own class when we look at Combat Evolved stats, where a regular Marine actually has 60 health with 45 to 50 armor that can regenerate, or in some cases just 50 health and 50 armor. Sergeant Johnson is built just slightly stronger than everyone else, where he actually has 75 health with the same 45 to 50 armor that all the other Marines have, so he gets 15 points more than the rest. I think it's also notable that crew members on the UNSC Pillar of Autumn have significantly less health than everyone else. They only have 25 health with 0 armor. And if we look at Captain Keyes, he has 60 health with 0 armor, which is interesting, but it also explains why we can, have an alternate ending to Combat Evolved at the very beginning if we choose to go down that route with invincible Marines that then come out, and those guys you can't kill at all. So it is interesting to see how that plays out. This actually becomes more relevant in Truth and Reconciliation, where you need to escort him out, and he likes to just run in there and instantly die when you're on those harder difficulties, and the fact that he only has 60 health and no armor may be a part of that. One thing we did find really interesting also, though, is that these random crew members, while they don't have a lot of health, they do, interestingly enough, as far as we can tell, randomly have invincibility, or at least some of them do. We noticed when we were testing out this area that some of the times, some of the crew members that were in these seats would be invincible. Now, this only seems to apply to some of the ones that are sitting down, and some of the times it would be the one in this seat, and some of the times it would be the one in this seat, but every time we reloaded the section, anywhere from 2 to 4 of them would be completely invincible, and it seemed pretty random as to which 2 to 4 would be invincible, and it didn't seem to be dictated by which seat they were sitting in. Also, we were so used to just popping keys in one shot that we never really tested out beforehand how much keys can actually take. And you can pull off 3 shots to his leg. As soon as you do the first shot, everything goes crazy like normally, but it was interesting that it was 3 shots to the leg. Also, one interesting thing is when you do betray keys and all of these invincible Marines come running in. In original graphics, one of them is Sergeant Johnson, or has Sergeant Johnson's model. And I think 343 accidentally whitewashed Sergeant Johnson in the anniversary version of the game, because when you switch between the graphics, it's just a completely different Marine model that is used here. Now, as far as putting this into comparison and how this plays out, or what you can use to kind of gauge this, in a normal playthrough, Master Chief has 75 shields, which is kind of the equivalent of armor, and then 75 health. So he's a little bit stronger than everybody else, but we can kind of see how that scales across the board. For a standard Marine, or in Johnson's case, before his name was even Sergeant Johnson, he was actually classified as just a Marine Major. And then, of course, with Halo 2, there are 2 special Marines that can't actually take damage with Sergeant Johnson and Miranda Keyes. Interestingly enough, when Halo 3 rolls around, Sergeant Johnson does this weird die and respawn thing, and Miranda Keyes still stays invincible. In Halo 2, other than the Special Marines that we already took a look at, it seems like the Marines were worked a little bit differently, this time removing the whole armor element from a standard Marine and just relying them completely on health. This time around, General Kidd actually found that the health is bumped up for Halo 2 to 100 points and the same 2-second recharge after a 4-second delay. Now, what's really interesting is these stats actually stay consistent through many different iterations of Halo. Halo 3, for example, same exact stats as Halo 2, same with Halo Reach and also Halo 4, but still, nonetheless, Halo 2, 3, and Reach, and also with 4, the Marines all have the same amount of health consistently with that original buff that they had taking into effect. Though, this gets more interesting when we start looking closer at Halo 4, which introduced other types of NPCs. Like, for instance, Spartans became a thing that you now fight alongside in certain cases, which we'll look into that in just a second. But as in Halo 3, where Johnson dies and comes back to life, and Miranda Keyes is just indestructible, Halo 3 ODST does have that random security guard that can meet up with you on Data Hive, and we thought he'd maybe have a little bit more health than a regular Marine, but he's actually really weak. We did also find that the civilians in Halo Reach are a bit weaker than the Marines in Halo Reach, though if you do manage to get a shot off on a standard civilian, the punishment is pretty harsh. But at least we know they're weak. Now, while we notice that the health does scale across all the Halo games more or less the same, one little difference that we did notice when we were testing these things out was that some of the times Master Chief's punch might be more or less effective based on which game we were playing. So a lot of the times punching Marines to test out their health would be something like 3 punches and then they were out, where in other games sometimes it was more or even significantly less. Now, it is hard to always test this consistently because if a Marine takes any damage ahead of time, we don't know what their health is looking like, but it was worth noting that while the health allegedly has the same stats across the board for these Halo games, Master Chief's punches may not always be the most consistent. Halo 4, once again, pops up here with the introduction of Spartans, because when you punch a regular Marine in Halo 4, 1 punch is all it takes and they're just completely out. However, it takes 3 punches to take out a Spartan, whereas in the older Halo games, you typically would need to punch a Marine 3 times to take them out. We decided to look at this a little bit closer with the older games, like in Halo 2, for example, there are regular Marines, but then there's also ODSTs that pop up in some of the levels, but the ODSTs take the same amount of punches to take out as a regular Marine, so there isn't any difference here, it's just a different skin. Interestingly enough, on ODST, there's this officer who's up in the computer panel wanting to blow up the bridge, and in general, there's this little dialogue between him and the superintendent, and during this time before the bridge blows up, he is completely invincible. You cannot kill him. I guess his dialogue's really important. However, once you do blow up the bridge and he drops down, he's fair game. You can hunt him down and he's just like a regular Marine. So he actually loses his invincibility. In Halo 4, I was curious to see also if Lasky was a character that I could punch like some other characters. He's a little weird though. He just kind of takes it for a second, doesn't flinch at all, but then you can actually push him towards the edge of the mammoth and completely knock him off, which I was super proud of myself. He just like awkwardly follows the mammoth from behind, and then he just yeets himself right back up into the mammoth. That was definitely not what I expected to happen, but hey, he does, and then he despawns right after that. Also on Shutdown, I was testing out fighting Marines and Spartans, and I just wanted to note that there's this random Marine that looks a lot like Lasky, but not quite like Lasky. Almost like some off-brand Lasky. Like if Toys R Us had some Laskies for sale, and you ended up going to like this janky Dollar Tree or something, and you got this guy. I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. When it comes down to Halo 5, we don't actually have the exact numbers and stats to pull from to try to figure out the actual health when it comes to these types of soldiers that are actually in the game. So we decided to do some groundwork and test out some theories, which would also be what we would have to do moving forward into Halo Infinite. So we went and we tested thoroughly a bunch of Marines across Halo 5 and Halo Infinite, and what we were able to do was come up with some guesses as to how strong we think these guys are. Halo 5 is a little bit interesting because in general, there are just not that many levels that have Marines or AIs like Marines to even test with. There's a couple of areas with some scripted deaths, and there are also a lot of Prometheans introduced in Halo 5 with their weapons that just rip apart Marines, and since the Promethean weapons weren't something that were kind of standard across all the Halo games, it does make it really tricky to try to test these statistics. A lot of the time they run into some sort of scripted sequence, and just in general, we also get penalized if we punch them. So we're thinking that they're probably more or less similar to Halo 4, but they really don't want us messing with it too much. And then with Halo Infinite, it's another really tricky one because we can't test this out as the Infinite Marines are straight up invincible. Now, it is interesting looking at them because they seem smarter and tougher across the board, but we don't actually know if they're more strong, like they have more health, or is their AI just reworked and they are able to do more, be more competent, and survive better, which is something maybe they couldn't do with the more primitive AI. It's definitely hard to see, but in general, a lot of people have noted that they do survive a lot better against the Covenant, and it could just be because of better mapping in AI, or maybe they have more health. We can't actually fully test it. I'm leaning towards them probably being more closely to just a standard Marine as we've seen in the past, and then they just have a little bit of a smarter AI. So there's that. We managed to go through all the Halo games, taking a look at the Marines to see which were the strongest and which were the weakest, and it was kind of interesting to see some of these nuanced differences across the board. But if you like this video, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on for more videos like this. That's it for today. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.